Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the longer version of the talk that I have prepared for this year's Ecological Society of America conference. So my presentation is titled Enhancing Diversity and Inclusion in Ecology, an acknowledgment towards underrepresented groups in STEM. And again, this is the longer version of the presentation that I am giving today at ESA. So if you are tuning in during the time of the conference, please reach out to me. Let's connect in person. And yeah, cheers to doing more great science. So let's just jump right into it. So for today's talk, we'll be going into what it means to value diversity and inclusion on the personal level. And we'll do this through talking about the LACE model. And we'll then discuss how to continue enhancing diversity and inclusion in the workplace and in STEM through self-awareness, our relationships, and building just systems. And then we'll all shift gears a little bit and share some of the remarkable stories of some unheard of scientists or less talked about scientists that have revolutionized science as we know it. And really just uplift those stories so that more people can know who deserves credit for what. And then we'll have some closing comments. Conclusions and some more information if you're interested in checking out some resources. So what does it mean to value diversity and inclusion? Well, rooted in neuroscience, biology, and positive psychology, the LACE model is a model that connects people through multiple things. And the acronym for LACE stands for love, which in this context, we're talking about intentionally nurturing the growth and development of yourself and others in ways that add value. Authenticity, so aligning our values with our behaviors in ways that allow us to serve and lead in just and effective ways. Courage, so moving through fear, anxiety, tradition, and discomfort, or the status quo, to live out our values and serve others. So it can definitely take courage to stand up in certain situations, but we need to have courage to, break down these things that are happening in the workplace, call out what we see. And then for E, we have empathy. So understanding that other people's experiences and perspectives have value too, and using that understanding to support and or bring about change. So how do we continue to enhance diversity and inclusion? Well, with LACE, we can call each individual to action, starting with introspection for personal development and actionable change. So we can do this through 3 levels of change, starting with self-awareness, which then kind of leads into relationships and just systems. So these things build off of one another, and we're going to kind of talk about how here in the next slides. So starting with self-awareness, we can ask ourselves, why do we behave the way that we do? What needs to remain the same and what needs to be different? We're all raised in different circumstances and, in different societies. So we need to kind of be introspective about, what can we unlearn, what can we change to create a safer space for other people. So again, introspection opens our eyes to who we are, our strengths, weaknesses, core values, blind spots, and life purpose. So through being introspective, we can bring about self-awareness in ourselves, and self-awareness in turn brings the choices that we make unconsciously into the light of day. So with that being said, self-awareness helps us manage our choices and our actions. And we can ask ourselves, how are we showing up in the world? Who are we becoming? And we can make that a conscious thing that we are, consciously doing on a daily basis. So, through practicing self awareness, we can become aware of our shortcomings and we can really lean into our current relationships and learn how to change and learn just how to be different, especially when we're in a place of a receptive mindset where we can honestly take feedback and become aware to things that we might be unconscious to in the workplace. And this can show through in multiple different ways in the context of diversity and inclusivity. So through leaning in and learning how to kind of deal with our shortcomings, we can then resolve conflict with our relationships, and we can transform individuals into teams, partners, co-conspirators, and collaborators working toward a common and just purpose. And with those two things, we can create more just systems. So, through introspection and enhanced connections with others, we can create policies, processes, practices, and systems that are radically inclusive. And they're loving, not just begrudgingly tolerant to, people being there. They love these people. We welcome these people. We welcome minority groups. We welcome women in STEM and in our fields and in ecology. Um, and this creates a space that is wholly inclusive. This creates a space that is actively anti-oppressive and is kind and just. And those are the kinds of systems that we want to be operating in and creating. So one way that we can start today is by uplifting diverse role models. We can help others to see the possibilities of careers in STEM by providing them with the stories of people that look like them, have been through things that they've been through, providing these stories and giving credit where it's due. Because our foundations in ecology haven't necessarily been built off of diverse communities. And that being said, we have so many stories that have been lost or forgotten about, that are truly remarkable in what we know about the world today. And yeah, these stories, deserve to be shared. So today, we will be discovering the untold through two stories. First, we'll talk about Percy Julian, an American chemist and pioneer of the chemical synthesis of medicinal drugs. And then we'll talk a little bit about Eunice Foote, an American scientist, inventor, and women's rights campaigner. But I assure you, there are many more people that remain unrecognized, and they have remarkable contributions to science and ecology. So I really urge everybody today to find those stories, start talking about those stories and sharing those stories if you know them, and definitely share them in the comments of this video if you have any stored in the back of your mind. I would love to hear more about awesome, unheard of scientists. So yeah. So starting with Percy Julian, he was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1899. And all throughout his elementary school, middle school, like primary school days, he was denied resources like attending the public library and, just access to the resources that white students had. He's growing up in a very segregated, racist time. But regardless of that, as a young child growing up, he still excelled in school greatly, and it didn't go unnoticed, by his parents, and they wanted to give him the opportunity to develop his genius. And in 1916 he attends DePaul University in Indiana, but he's not allowed to live on campus or even eat on campus. And then after a while, he finds an opening in the Sigma Pi fraternity, but the only way he's allowed to live on campus and live with this fraternity is if he waits on his housemates and kind of does all of these extra servicing things. And so that was kind of, what he had to do in order to have school be an accessible thing, be able to live on campus and be able to get to his classes. And regardless of all of these extra challenges that he faced during his time at DePaul, he still graduates as valedictorian of his class. And if that is not exemplary of the type of genius that this man was, like, I don't know what is, because that is just an amazing, amazing achievement. And for anybody who isn't familiar with it, like valedictorian, it's basically in the US just the top spot, the highest grades, the top student in the graduating class. So after that, he goes to Harvard for his master's degree. And he gets his master's degree, but he wants a PhD. You know, he's a skilled chemist. He has this natural genius to him. Um, but he's pushed out of Harvard for his PhD because he's denied a teaching assistantship, because in your PhD you are required to do a teaching assistantship, but at Harvard at the time, they denied him that opportunity because white students would not want to be in a class with a Black um, teacher's assistant. So they denied him that opportunity and he was unable to do his PhD there. So in the meantime, he goes to Howard University to teach for 2 years. And eventually, he obtains a grant to attend the University of Vienna for his PhD studies. So this is what brings us to kind of his more revolutionizing of chemistry story. So while he's getting his PhD in Vienna, he's isolating alkaloids, which is something that had not been done before. And he actually uses his work with an alkaloid that can be used as a drug to treat pain for his PhD. And he does account that in Vienna, he actually felt more accepted than he did at, say, like DePaul or Harvard. But ultimately, after obtaining the PhD, he goes back to Indiana, to Howard, which is where he taught for 2 years. And I like to believe he was kind of coming back to say, like, hey, I actually did it. I have the PhD now, you know. And so he is giving a teaching position at Howard, but is quickly fired due to some disliking from his colleagues in his department. And some personal emails of his that were leaked by one of his colleagues. So yeah, he's fired from Howard and he returns to DePaul. But because of his record, he's kind of put behind the scenes doing research. And yeah, you know, he's not only is he a Black professor, but he's now have this like record of being fired from Howard. And so yeah, he's behind the scenes. But this is where it gets interesting. So he has experience with synthesizing alkaloids, and he synthesizes physostigmine. And physostigmine is an alkaloid from the calabar bean. And it's an important compound that can treat glaucoma. So Percy and his research partner are researching and publishing the intermediate steps of this synthesis. And before they can publish the findings on the synthesis of physostigmine, they are scooped. Unfortunate, I know. But so yeah, in 1935, Robertson publishes the synthesis to physostigmine, and Percy and his research partner are scooped. But Percy Julian realizes that there's some shortcomings of Robertson's work. And I guess this is the part where we say, you know, yeah, you can do it first, but you'd rather do it right. And that's, you know, what Percy Julian did. He went on to publish the correct total synthesis of physostigmine. And this was revolutionary for chemistry as a subject. So his publication gained a lot of attention, and the chemistry world definitely sat up and took notice of the new capabilities of chemical synthesis revealed by Julian. But as they find out that he's a Black scientist, he's disinvited from meetings and conferences. And despite the quality of his work, once these meeting organizers find out that he's Black, he's disinvited from giving a talk at all. Not only that, but he's then denied a 10-year position at DePaul. And it's crazy because you'd think that, coming from DePaul, they claim this man saying like, wow, look, one of our own has discovered these amazing things that are forwarding chemistry and forwarding science as a whole, and helping people. But he's denied that 10-year position. And he then picks up a managerial position at Glidden Chicago Lab. He's hired as the director of research here, where he went on to isolate alpha proteins. And his story does not end there. But for the sake of time, we are going to move on from it today. But yeah, he definitely mentions, that although he did great science, he wondered, what amazing things he could have done if he didn't have the hardships and the hurdles his entire life that he faced. um but he still deserves so much recognition for what he did do. So moving on to Eunice Foote, we're gonna go ahead and backtrack a little bit about a century or so and talk a little bit about women. So Eunice Foote was born in 1819 in Connecticut, and she was fairly privileged for the time. So she was lucky enough to attend Troy Female Seminary. So she was able to gain scientific knowledge at this time, and it was not common for women to really pursue science at all or like any other like careers. Um, so she goes on to marry Elisha Foote in 1841, and he is also an inventor, a lawyer, and a judge. So as you can imagine, Eunice is a fairly privileged person at this time. Um, she starts doing plenty of experiments at her home lab space, and she stumbles across what we now know as the greenhouse gas effect. So after leaving jars in the sun, and writing about her findings, she writes a paper called Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun Rays in 1856. And she basically talks about how water vapor and carbon dioxide trap heat from the sun. And it's the first revolutionizing idea of climate change and the idea of our atmosphere kind of serving as this warm, wet blanket over the earth. Um, and it's revolutionary, like I said. And Elisha is also doing work that's similar, and he's writing papers, and they both submit their work to the 10th annual AAAS conference. But Eunice doesn't actually present or even publish her work. Um, it's actually Joseph Henry, head of the Smithsonian, who presented her work at the time. And it's not really known why she didn't present or publish, because at this time, women were able to be members of the AAAS, association. And so it's not really known why she wasn't the one to present her work. But, we like to think that Joseph Henry was the one giving the talk because he recognized the importance of her work and wanted people to like really see the importance. And unfortunately, that's only really possible if a man was giving the talk. And although at the time that might have been a smart move, it's definitely sexist to look back on it, to know that for her work to be taken seriously, it needed to be presented by a man. So fast forward Joseph Henry and John Tyndall, the familiar name that we know that we'll talk more about in a second. Joseph corresponds with Tyndall extensively in the following years of him presenting Eunice's work. And before we know it, John Tyndall publishes in 1861 on the idea that the atmosphere is keeping the earth warm. Sound familiar? Well, not not to discredit John Tyndall, I want to mention that he did make great contributions and his work was undoubtedly different and enhancing, but he invented differential spectrometry and things like that. So not to discredit him, but where's Eunice's credit in all of this? She had written a paper that wasn't published, years before, and she wasn't given the opportunity to represent that work. But ultimately, John Tyndall dies from a chlorohydrate overdose, actually at the hands of his own wife, who was trying to mix him a sleeping medication. But yeah, unfortunately, he dies of an overdose. Um, so fast forward many, many years, John Tyndall kind of takes the reins for, discovering the greenhouse gas effect and things like that. But Eunice, as we now know, was talking about these things years before Tyndall, and the correspondences between Joseph Henry, John Tyndall, and Eunice Foote's work was all stored at the Smithsonian. Yay! But in 1867, there is a fire, and and yeah, that basically goes to show that her work is destroyed. And yeah, fast forward, Ray Sorensen in 2011, a retired petroleum geologist, writes a paper about Eunice Foote because he comes across some of her work and some of her unpublished work. Um, and it's not until 2015 until she gains the recognition that she undoubtedly deserves. And there's a global buzz surrounding Eunice Foote. But Eunice Foote accomplished much more than just climate change milestones. She was an accomplished women's rights activist and inventor, patenting things like insoles, papermaking, thermostatically controlled cook stoves, and other things. But the story of Eunice is definitely a privileged one. There are other characters that are hidden by the racist shadows of the time and our current racial lens that we have on history. So while Eunice is only now, over 150 years later, gaining the recognition that she deserves, this is still a white, privileged woman of her time. So we can only imagine what unheard stories there are for other minority women and women of color, men of color. There are so many other stories to be told, truly. So for the bigger picture, understanding climate change history is really rooted in Indigenous knowledge. And one example of this is the Aboriginals from Australia, who have some of the oldest oral histories going back thousands of years, talking about and understanding things that we talk about today. These teachings described accurate information regarding climate change, and white colonizers disregarded this. So there is a conversation to be had that, Indigenous knowledge is undoubtedly valuable. There's been a lot of work done by women and minorities who aren't remembered because they are not seen as important enough. And in fact, they are vital to the advancement of science. So why does all of it matter in the first place? Well, we live in a world full of identities, and you cannot be what you cannot see. Science operates within and amongst all of these identities, and they, shouldn't be discounted for. Histories of discrimination need to be taken into account so that we can change and have science reflect the world that it acts upon and within. So with that, I urge you to move forward with remembering the LACE model and being introspective and self-aware and calling out what you see and recognizing change that needs to happen and being the voice of that actionable change. So thank you so much for letting me give this talk today. And again, if you are seeing this during the time of the 2022 ESA meeting happening in Montreal, Canada, please come find me, reach out. Let me go ahead and switch to this slide. My email is at the bottom of this slide. So if you would like to continue the conversation, over email or in person, or just right here in the comment section of this video, please do so. And thank you and cheers to science. So bye.